All right, this is Jack Donovan, and you're listening to or watching PH2T3R, Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture. And I'm here, as always, with my co host, Mr. C.B. Robertson, author of many fine books. And so tonight, we wanted to talk. We called the show Gossip, but it was really a little bit more than that because gossip feels trashy, and I think there's a good exploration to say, why does gossip feel trashy? Because it is human. It's definitely a human universal. Like all societies gossip. Like if you get a few people together in a group, a couple of them are going to start talking about the other people in the group and the shit that they're doing. Can you believe that they're doing that? But I wanted to take it into a bigger discussion than just simple gossip, but really to talk about best practices. Because one of the things, and I think best practices might be something we add to this, I wanted to talk about as we're going through these philosophical discussions, we are reaching certain conclusions about like what we want. And that's kind of the project of the Order of Fire. Like, well, let's talk this out and without having any preconceived notions about, like we have to go back to some ancient society and do it this ancient way or, return to something. Well, let's sit here and talk this out from where we are right now in history. How do we feel about subject A? And then we'll go from there. And we kind of come together with some themes over time. And I think it would be a cool article for the next Pater book to kind of summarize what some of those conclusions have been. We struggled to come up with a universal good. I mean, things like that we were like, okay, well, we talked that through, and here's where we're at with it. And one of them, I talked about it in Fire in the Dark in terms of, like, well, what would Washington do in a situation? Is actually a pretty good guide. You could definitely do a lot worse than whatever Washington would have done, how he would have handled a situation. If you're taking that as a model, you're probably doing pretty good. And definitely was not one to get involved in pettiness, petty disputes and petty gossip, a little sniping back and forth and all that kind of stuff. And it's one of the reasons why I avoid it online so much and getting into like discussions of character. Of someone else's character and talking shit about them personally, except for politicians, because in America we believe that is our God-given right to criticize politicians because they spend our money and give it to they take our money away from us and give it to people we don't like, right. But and do things with it which we would prefer are not done. So it's our job to talk shit about them. But this idea for the show came out of a discussion we were having in the group about, well, at what point do you consider the man? Like they say ad hominem is a logical fallacy, which those are kind of fallacies. They're good, but they're best practices. I would say, like, if you're going to have a substantive discussion, as you might say, you maybe don't open with post physique. No. Like that's not necessarily the only discussion to have.
Although you might allow post physique to change who you have a conversation with, which is different.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, like who is, but like beyond that, just going right for, well, remember that one time when you did a shitty thing? Therefore, your argument is bad. It's not really a valid argument until it is.
Well, and I know you've expressed a little bit of regret about the no memes hashtag and that whole attempt, but this subject of ad hominem is one of the ones where you see a lot of people permit memes to kind of ruin their thinking. There's a lot of memes about the bell curve with the dumb guy is like, yes, just do this. And then the mid-tier person says that. And then the smart tier person says the same thing as the dumb person. And right. Like ad hominem is one of those things that keeps, or chad hominem as it's sometimes put. It's like, oh, it's really, really smart people will do this. and it's like cool and it's a Chad move to go ad hominem. You see that a lot in the meme culture, and it does ruin people's thinking there. So I wanted to point out the deleterious effect of memeing on thought here, because most of memes are a lot of memes. The Chad Virgin meme in particular is structurally ad hoc. It's all about trying to not even point out something that your opponent has done, but to portray your opponent in a conceptual sense, in an ugly way. It's like lower than an ad hoc. But I mean, this whole conversation began because there are circumstances in which criticizing the character of the individual is not an ad hominem fallacy. Right. And I think didn't this whole conversation come up because of the slippery slope and the slippery?
Yeah. We were talking. It was you and me and Dustin, and we were all talking about the slippery slope. And I was like, well, it's not always that, and because that's another one that people talk about is slippery slope,
right?
And sometimes there are direct chains of results from one thing to another, but also other times that just because this one thing happened, that thing was reasonable. Yeah. Don't make this thing that is super unreasonable like an absolute consequence of that.
This is the really unfortunate thing I think about people. The rhetorical employment of logical fallacies when they aren't fallacies, because a slippery slope fallacy is when concern in question actually doesn't follow from the premise. It's like, if we lose Christianity, it'll all be anarchy. Right. It's like, well, hang on,
because that's historically incorrect.
How does that follow? But if they said, if we lose Christianity, they're going to stop teaching Bible studies in school, like hypothetically, that actually logically follows. Sure. So that's not a slippery slope, because there's a logical connection between the cause and the consequence. But if someone says, there's a, if we do X, then like alpha will happen, and it's some entirely related thing, that's the logical fallacy. So it's very unfortunate that these terms get misused. And ad hominem, I think, is very similar. It feels like it's used mostly as a matter of taste. Like, it's distasteful to criticize an individual, whether it's relevant or not, even. And sometimes it is relevant. It's usually when you're discussing a philosophical point, it's usually not relevant unless you're pointing to a broad pattern. Now, it's funny that we're talking about this today, because I was going down a weird physiognomy rabbit hole.
With wizards.
Yes. And that's not even a critical thing. This isn't an ad hominem because it's not an attack at all. It's just an interesting category. Why do all these guys seem to be balding, skinny, 5'7", deceptively fit, usually martial artists or athletes of some sort, and they talk in a particular way with lots of hand gesticulations, wizard hands, and it's just a weird little pattern that pops up, and it's interesting to talk about. Might be relevant to the fact that they all seem to think in a similarly dissimilar from the norm manner. I don't know. There's a lot more to think about with that, but there's a pattern with people, and it makes sense to talk about it. And it's not delegitimizing their ideas or their work or anything to talk about the people. And so if you say, wow, all the people who believe X seem to be really fit people, or all the people who believe Y seem to be over the age of 65, or all the people who believe Z are under the age of 20, like the broader patterns can be relevant. As our inspiring friend Nietzsche has variously pointed out. The thing is, well, with these kinds of statistics, it's very hard to extrapolate anything meaningful in the case of a given singular individual. And so if like one asshole says something and it happens to look pretty plausible, the fact that he's an asshole may or may not have anything to do with the veracity of what he's saying.
Right.
And that's when it begins to feel like an ad hominem, where you're not keeping focus on the issue at hand, but you're trying to distract from the actual object of the conversation in order to win.
Yeah, and one area where I think it's valid, but also can be like very, I don't know, like conjectural, is when you ascribe motivations to the person making an argument. Because that is a valid attack of an idea. It's like, well, you're saying that because X. Like, you have a motivation, you have a reason to say that, and it is logical and reasonable for me to like say this is why you were saying that. You know, like if you're editing my Wikipedia and you happen to be a gender activist, that might signal that it's going to have your difficulty being neutral point of view. You know, and so many situations like that, and it's a very valid thing to say, like, well, why do you want that thing? Like, why are you arguing that point? And to wonder about that. But then you can also, this is where we keep coming back to this as our theme of discussions, is this judgment call. Like, okay, well, is that actually reasonable? Like, is that what's going on here? As humans, we can say like X plus Y equals Z or whatever, but is that actually what's happening? You know, because I think you could make an argument, well, that seems like it could be a thing that someone like that would write or say with their background and motivations, but does that seem to bear out? Does that seem to be intent, or is there sincerity involved?
Yeah.
You know, are they trying to, is it just because they have daddy issues of some kind that they're like writing about this, or do they have like a legitimate point? In spite of their daddy issues, or because or you can overcome your daddy issues, like
Nietzsche.
Yeah, Nietzsche exactly is a perfect example in terms of like, well, I've heard it said it's the dumbest discussion in the world. Again, very much at Homonym is like, didn't he like go insane and talking to a horse? So therefore, you should disregard one of the most important philosophers in history and everything that he ever said, because the guy went insane and ended up talking to a horse. Yeah, or whatever the story is, you know, because I don't even think that story actually happened. That's like a fictional thing that got added on or something. But
I mean, he did go insane, but like that was later. But I mean, you don't even need to do that. You can look at what he wrote about himself in Ecce Homo, saying, aren't you a decadent, Herr Nietzsche? Yes, I am a decadent, and my Ubermensch status doesn't make me better than other men in like a direct physical sense, but in overcoming this natural tendency. He's like, yes, I have these bad tendencies that I don't like, and that is what gives me the power of perception. That it takes one to know one vision to say I am a decadent, and I can see the spirit of decadence in these other people like St. Paul or, Euripides or whomever.
Yeah, and there is a certain, if you've worked through some shit, if you've worked through a popular problem that a group of people similar to you or whatever, or how you appear to be, usually have, you can spot it a mile away. You're like, I can see. I remember, like that joke, like, people always say, like, I remember my first beer. This kind of thing that you can say about almost anything, like, oh, I remember level 1. I remember. I mean, like you. I mean, we've both at different time in our life been kind of new atheists. Like I remember being really really mad at Christians, and I remember that and was just wanting to prove them wrong about everything. I remember being in that stage. I'm not in that stage now, but I remember that, and I know what that feels like, and that's a little bit of life experience too. Or I remember being in because I've been attached to and involved in a lot of weird things over the years, and oh yeah, I remember what that's like. I remember that vibe. I can see that a mile away now because I was close to it.
Right.
Where and so I don't think that. Whereas the other tendency to go the other direction, what I think the left does a lot with ad hominems, really is that they'll do that smear of well, you thought this 10, 15 years ago, or you were in a room with these people 10 or 15 years ago. Therefore, your destiny is to always have the same view, and always be with those people. Those people are always in your life.
You know who also does
you.
that is not just the left. The left does it in large numbers, but the tinfoil hat brigade on the far-ish right does this too. With the here's a picture of a politician shaking hands with someone or in a room with someone. Because politicians shake hands with approximately 500 people a day.
Right.
So, but here's a picture of this politician with this random person. So they must have been real close and really good friends and talking all the time.
Right.
And smear oftentimes they're trying to smear legitimately bad people, but you don't need that stupid picture to smear them. And you're also putting here's a picture of Donald Trump shaking hands with some I don't know, a Jeffrey Epstein type character.
Right.
That actually means nothing. And it actually doesn't mean any more when Bill Clinton does it necessarily.
Right.
The actual other ties and flight logs and other things are a lot more meaningful than just one picture of a politician in a room with one person at one time. And that's not just true of politicians, it's true of everybody. I used to, back when I was in my early college years, and we were still, GWAT was still full underway, and there anti-Muslim sentiment was a little bit more common. It started to fade again, but I was reading the Quran and the hadiths and the reliance of the traveler, and I was kind of deep diving into Islam at that time. Mm-hmm. And I used to wonder, man, I wonder if some FBI type is monitoring this random white kid in suburbia looking up all this Islamic stuff. I'm for me, it was kind of opposition research. I was still in my hard new atheist, anti-religion in general phase. And I was reading up on Islam in the way that I would have read the Bible 2 years ago, which is what can I pull out of this to nitpick and attack and stuff. But just and that's how James Lindsay reads Marx or Soros or these sorts of people. It's just because you're reading something doesn't mean you're interested. You know who's met a lot of really terrible people is James O'Keefe. That doesn't actually make James O'Keefe a bad person by association, just because he's met and even dated a lot of these bad people. Sorry, I have foreknowledge that the Dilbert cartoon tomorrow is going to involve Wally from the Dilbert office winding up on a date with James O'Keefe. So it's But anyways, that the danger of ad hominem, I feel is in taking shortcuts that are offered to you as excuses to dismiss ideas without refuting them first.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that the character isn't relevant when noticing broader patterns. Because I feel it's become kind of a common joke in many circles that why are all these communists like really ugly people.
Right.
Yeah. That's like, if you were to say an individual like Slavoj Žižek is wrong because he is weird looking and ugly and speaks like a frog or whatever, like that would be an ad hominem. You can engage with the ideas directly and then say, and by the way, you should also not do that because he's ugly, for a rhetorical flourish for fun. But like you have to actually deal with the ideas first if you're trying to do the legitimate thing and learn something. I know it can be tempting to just dismiss these ideas out of hand because they're wrong, and they're wrong, and you might even be right that they're wrong. But if you don't address the problem, if you don't address the idea itself, everyone who sees that interaction is going to walk away thinking you're the closed-minded one. And that's not very, even if if your motivation is rhetorical, that's not good rhetoric.
Right. Right. Huh.
So, slight sidebar, Elvis Presley says, Theodore Roosevelt once said, you got to be a barbarian first before you can be a gentleman. How can I be hyper-masculine without feeling like a fake? I have a more Clark Kent personality, which I think is kind of ambitious on its own, but how can I confront my boss who treats me and everyone like trash? He seems to know how to push my buttons, and I don't know what to do because I was raised to be kind.
There's a lot there. There's a lot going on in that question. First of all, don't ever say hypermasculinity.
Yeah.
Because it's gay. Hypermasculinity.
You will always feel like a fake.
Yeah, well, hypermasculinity, it contains a value judgment inside of it. Right. It's basically already, it's like toxic masculinity. It's a modifier. It means too much masculinity, and so we've already too much for who. Like it implies that you're too masculine, or your behavior is too masculine, and then it's like, well, who is making that value judgment? And normally it's like feminists. So that is their language. It goes back to, weirdly, I've researched this, and the first time I could actually ever find it being used, it was in a fairly racist study about Mexicans. Like in the 50s or 60s, about like their machismo culture, and like they were hyper masculine, and that's how it was described the whole thing. And that was the first, like in Google words or whatever, that was the first like usage I could ever find of it, because I was writing about the time, and I was like it was kind of a sketchy article, to be honest. Like for now, you'd be like, oh, that was pretty shitty that they said that. Yeah. But
if you wanted to employ logical fallacies and like shitty rhetoric, you could just accuse all anti-masculinity stuff as like racist against Latinos.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, as far as the advice stuff goes, I mean, obviously.
I feel like Mick Tubis actually gives a pretty good answer. He says,
okay, cool.
Elvis, get your financial ducks in line, have options, be prepared to walk. If you don't need the job, he has the power, which seems correct. And to which he says, unfortunately, I do need the job, as we all do, but there's always another job. I mean, it's pretty much correct there.
Put your exit strategy,
Yeah, and this goes back to the masculine virtue of mastery, competence. The more skills you develop and build, the more. And this, what's funny is it actually goes hand in hand with his question about becoming masculine. A lot of masculinity is literally just competence, whether that's physical competence at lifting things or manual competence at fixing or building things. Like developing that competence will solve both your problems at once.
Yeah. Competence and confidence are this like they kind of come together and feed into each other. In terms of like, if you become competent in things, then you're confident about it. And confidence is generally reads as being masculine, because you're like, oh, well, I can do this. Yeah, that's not a big deal. And the idea, another big quality that has to do with masculinity generally is expansiveness, in the sense of like, if you feel very capable of doing a lot of things, like okay, like you don't have the what the body language of being closed down is tends to be look very defensive and like I'm scared.
Right.
And whereas like, oh really? Tell me more about that. You like that seems like you're a Chad because you're like open and like you're like open. I can handle whatever you're gonna throw at me. I can handle it. And you have that air about you, and that's where if you can develop that in a lot of different ways, and you feel like interesting, like like oh, I could have that exchange. If you just throw that off.
Yeah.
And the only way you can throw that off is to put yourself in those experiences where you've had. I mean, all of us have situations all the time where we are not in our comfort zone, and you're not going to be as you're not going to seem as confident if you're outside of your area of expertise,
Right.
or something like that. So, I mean, a trick is to like seem a little clueless that you're out of your expertise, but generally, I mean, the more things that you have expertise in or experience in, situations you've been in, the more you're going to have that confidence.
Yeah, exactly. And I think honestly the pickup artists come to mind because it was funny to watch the pickup artist world evolve from like the mid 2000s into the late 2010s, because at first it was a collection of tricks. It was a collection.
Yeah.
Here's a line that will get the girl, and then it was like, then you dress a certain way, and then you carry yourself a certain way, and then it became less about particular lines and more about like a vibe that you would bring to interactions. And they had tricks for developing the vibe, but it became about the vibe. And then at a certain point, it became all about a mindset. And not even about the tricks or even the vibe. It was just the mindset. And the mindset was outcome independence. That was what they were like, the Real Social Dynamics guys, Owen Cook and what was the other guy's name? Anyways, yeah, it was outcome. And I feel like that's attractive not just to women, but to other men too, in a platonic sense, because that actually gives off masculine energy. And to take, I feel like to get there, I mean, part of it's just something that's cultivated, but it sort of naturally follows from taking responsibility. And like outcome independence feels like the most masculine response to assholes in the workplace, because past a certain point, if you're responsible, you're like, well, if they do this, what will I do? Well, I'll quit. Okay. So I don't need to force the asshole in the office to do anything. I'll just be like, hey boss, I don't like working with this guy. I've tried. Is there something you can do? If not, that's fine. And they said, no, there's not. And you're like, okay, cool. Here's my 2 weeks. And then, and there's no need to be, to use gendered language, bitchy about it.
Right.
There's no need to play these games that try to put the onus of responsibility upon someone else to change in order to make your situation better. So anyways, that like connection between responsibility with outcome independence, with the office workplace, and the desire to be more masculine all seem to kind of fit together.
Yeah. Yeah. What is the outcome independence is one, and also abundance mentality.
Right.
Is another area that they specifically honed in on a lot. I remember seeing that a lot. But I mean, the sense that like the red pill guys would be like, well, know that there are 1,000, like millions of girls. So none of them are actually like that important. You can just get another one. So that was very kind of outcome independence too. But like, there's this, there's so many. Or it's like there's always more money. You can always find a way to make money or something like that. Then you're not always like so scared of money. Things like that. It's all in the same band, really, like that kind of stuff.
Right. No, exactly. And I mean, to sort of tie it back to the ad hominem thing at the end, slightly, so much of the dynamic of an argument changes depending on who you're participating in the argument for. Like if you are participating in the argument in order to win status points, in order to look cool, in order to win and be intimidating in a like social context, like you're a lawyer, for example,
Right.
it makes sense to use every logical fallacy in the book, every dirty trick you can sneak in order to win. But if your goal is to be smarter, to understand the position better, and to just be better informed and to know the arguments for and against a particular issue in some greater degree of detail, you are harming yourself by taking the easy way out and dismissing a position because of the character of the individual. I can say all day long, well, Rousseau was a child abandoning asshole and Marx was an unclean, lazy, like armchair philosopher who never did a day's work in his life for the working class that he championed. And I could say all that, and that would have no persuasive power on people for whom those ideas like touch a chord and it means something to. I've just isolated myself from, the world that is being affected by this idea. And I feel like we have suffered culturally. I mean, we're both as anti-Semite as anybody, but the degree of censorship around certain issues on that in the last 20 years has sort of given us, I think, a weak immune system for certain kinds of arguments that have been allowed to incubate in isolation and develop and grow. And we can probably think of a number of other types of arguments that have been sitting in isolation, developing. We kind of jokingly brought up flat Earth a while ago. Man, if you go down those flat Earth rabbit holes, they have thought of so much stuff. They've put so much work into developing this together. And people's dismissal of it. I'm not saying everyone needs to go out and like learn about flat Earth arguments or anything like that. But I'm saying, like, if you want the power to refute ideas or to engage with them meaningfully at all, you can't use ad hominem or other fallacies, other shortcuts to dismiss them. Or if you do, don't be surprised if they come back bigger and more powerful for not having been addressed at an earlier stage.
That's true. That's true. And I wonder too, in gentler times, in times where, like, I think there was a little bit more of an established class of men of ideas. And there's always been gossip and there's always been ad hominems and like sleazy political moves and all kinds of stuff. But I think there were different patches in our even last 100 years of history where political opponents would sit down and have smoke cigarettes and like have like intellectual arguments about policy issues without ever like once talking about one of their affairs or their like fucking whatever. Like I think that happened for a long time. That was one of the things that were discussing when we were talking about this in our group.
Yeah. Does having 5 girlfriends make your science worse?
Exactly. Yeah, like the Huberman thing, or like it's like so many, like Hollywood used to protect all of its stars. Like because they're just actors. They're fucking vaudeville people. They got into all kinds of mischief and fucking drugs and sex and murder and all kinds of things. But they were on screen. They were America's sweetheart, and you needed to like maintain that, and that was more important and kind of makes sense. To be honest, like, do we really need to know that, like, the girl who plays this wonderful person on screen is having a train run on her, like all the time. Like, no, we actually probably don't need. We're not better for that knowledge. These are just myth makers. Just let them be myth makers, and we don't need to worry about that. And the same thing with politicians. I wonder if in a more gentlemanly time, or wait a minute, maybe it was just worse. But because you could kill somebody with a lot smaller gossip, maybe. But I often wonder if it's just a fear of escalation. Because if we're all in the old boys club, as they used to call it, if we're all in the old boys club together, that Bob's been over there like banging his secretary, and do we want to go there? Do we want to go there? Because then we're going to bring this up, and we're going to, let's just not talk about that.
That's how the boys club starts, though, isn't it? You get a group of guys together, and you all do something nefarious and nasty together. Thank you, David Cameron. And and so none of you bring it up, or else all of you are in on it together. That seems to be how that is set up. Yeah, I mean, the to play devil's advocate though a little bit, because I'm actually a little torn on this. Mm-hmm. Is when kids enter the picture. And the example that comes to mind is, Hollywood actors would be one good example. Another example that's more for boys than girls is sports stars. Mm-hmm. So say you have a football player that you really admire and you look up to, but you find out the football player has been involved in dogfighting, or has been involved in some kind of moral crime of some sort. He's like a serially unfaithful to his spouse or something like that. We can, as adults, can be like, his job is to be a football player. It's not to be some moral paragon. He's not a priest. Not the priests are necessarily moral paragons either. But he can't we compartmentalize? Can't we say, okay, we're not going to judge our musicians by their political views, or our politicians by their musical taste, or our football players by their moral character, or whatever. But when kids are involved in watching these games, and the kids begin to idolize particular players, I could see why some people would want to protect kids from that. And even in a public that largely wants to compartmentalize these things and say, okay, Bill Clinton did a thing he maybe shouldn't have done. That doesn't mean he's screwing up our economy.
Right.
Nevertheless, the rhetoric of people who invoke that might still be effective. And it might still tear these people down. And it seems like a lot of I was always fascinated by the Roman political obsession with flattery, and the Roman notion of morality among the politicians seemed to be largely don't be tempted into doing wrong things, because that will be used against you in a political context. So they're very, very like utilitarian about it, and not utilitarian, practical and political in their morality. But it led them to a very like conventional moral place, because society was conventionally moral for religious reasons. So it was very important for them to appear right. They would I'm sure many of them would follow something like the who was Donald Trump's vice president, not sitting with women alone without someone else there, things like that.
That's a great rule,
just to avoid any appearance of impropriety.
Right.
It seems
that was the smartest thing that dude ever said.
Yeah.
I would highly advise that for any politician, certainly, but just most men in the workplace. You did that was a good idea.
Yeah, Mike Pence.
Yes. Yeah.
So, so like the whether or not we think, a certain kind of ad hominem rhetorical attack is worthwhile for your own, like, epistemic edification and education, it still makes sense to take into account in terms of our behavior and avoiding those kinds of things.
Well, and I think that we're, I mean, that's true. I mean, we don't need to talk about what we're talking about, but I think we all know in the group, like we've talked about before, there's certain things that I could be doing that I'm not doing because I don't need to deal with the mess that would send my way. And so like, and it's just is what it is. Like, it'd be better to not, you have to deal with that mess. But I don't know. I think, the other thing is that the way that the media is, and that the media was that way since the media existed. The idea that the media was impartial is like this sweet spot of like the middle of last century idea. Like the original newspaper guys were all like partisan papers. Like, I'm going to start a paper and it's going to have my opinions in it, and like all the people who have my opinions are going to write for that paper, and that was how all newspapers were. Like up until like people had a fantasy about newspapers being like objective for a minute, and now that's gone again, or it should be gone, and where they're all just partisans, and that's fine. But the one thing that has happened, and yellow journalism came out before the internet or anything like that, but I think the internet, like paparazzi kind of culture, this gossip culture that we live in, that where gossip is not only like something that maybe you should know this about so and so, but it's just a product in and of itself.
Right.
It doesn't matter it doesn't matter if they're like destroying a family or like bringing up something that maybe they've already settled behind closed doors and you don't need to fucking be involved in it. But there are people who are bringing things up, are looking for dirt on anybody because dirt is worth money.
Yeah.
And that is a whole industry that I don't think existed before the 20th century in the same way. I mean, there's probably some of it, but yeah.
What's crazy is that the truly the most business savvy kinds of cunning, smart people seem to have leaned into this and created drama and gossip about themselves. The Kardashians come to mind. There are, I'm sure, many other examples of people who do and try to do that. I think one of the things that we were sort of complaining about also in our order chat was the beef manufacturing culture within like YouTube and social media. People will do that to try to get attention. They'll pick fights with people kind of needlessly. I mean, I'm not the best. I'll pick fights sometimes, but that's because I want to argue the point. I'm interested. Right. I had a very funny interaction last week where it started with me and this is the most annoying kind of Christian account, just kind of insulting each other. It was like the lowest of lowbrow stuff, and then he messaged me and like, what like, why are you doing this? I'm like, dude, you started this. Like, you're literally putting out a propaganda page, blah blah blah. And we started talking back and forth, and like the shit flinging turned into an argument about who was the true hero in Homer, and the connection with Christianity from there. And like it like moved into a higher place, which is like my favorite thing to do. And took it out of his domain, which was like he was still trying to do propaganda. It just turns out it was a very smart and also kind of young, experienced kid doing it. But you can get into fights and arguments that are about ideas, which is, I think, the best kind of arguments, and the arguments that are truly worth having. The conversations that are perhaps most worth having. They're the most interesting ones, much more interesting than talking about the weather or sports ball or who's fighting who and over where, But all I'm trying to say is, dismissing or trying to get away from gossip doesn't mean getting away from arguments or talking about people or ideas. It
No,
is
no.
in some sense in an effort to salvage and defend the enjoyment and value and even beauty of good arguments that you try to separate the gossip and the ad hominem fallacy type stuff from the legitimate character talk.
Right. Well, I mean, two of the things that we brought up, two of the issues that I have with gossip culture is and ad hominems and things like that. One of them was that the way that it is in conflict with great man theory, and we're very much great man theory guys, and we see really pettiness kind of being used at like, well, so and so, did you know this about his past, or even like most recently, like the worst episode of it I saw was there was a movie that came out last year. It was about Leonard Bernstein, the conductor, and Maestro is what it was called. And man, he actually conducted, I think, my favorite version of Symphony Number 3 for organ from Saint-Saëns. I think he conducted my favorite version of it. I'm not sure, but I've certainly listened. If he did one, if it wasn't, then it was like a Mahler thing or something. But he's done my favorite versions of a few things, and so I would have loved to have watched a movie about how a conductor becomes a great conductor. You know, and what that is, you know, and what that experience is and what it's about. What it was a trashy, and obviously still trying to make him look like a great guy, important dude, but it was really all about his wife and how put upon she was. And of course he was a secret gay, as half these guys were. And so, like, his secret little life back around and whatever, and how they dealt with that, and like, then it ends with him like being like old and like ruined in a fucking gay nightclub, like doing coke with whatever. And I'm like, this is a great man who did great things, and like, I want to know about that. I don't care that he was like doing this and that and his side and whatever, and like whatever. Extreme people have extreme tendencies. And people, like anyone who does something that's really a big thing, probably has some screws loose somewhere, and it has gotten, you know, like they've lived some interesting life, and they're driven by odd things. You know, there's a lot of guys who were driven to become rich because they were dirt poor, or like, you know, like they've just had terrible experiences, and it's like, yes, you can say that happens, and maybe let's look at why that affected that. But it's kind of like, it's degrading in the way that like,
and it's not
like
just
in the way that Napoleon, like the Napoleon complex is degrading to like, okay, so he was a short guy, like his short guy who like, yeah, yeah, I know exactly. And it became like this thing, but like this ongoing thing. So it's just this ongoing degradation of his character, to say that everything that he did was about in life was because he was short.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just trashiness. And it's like, it's a way to bring someone big down to size. And we see that so much in our culture today.
The irony is that kind of logic, first, it all winds up back at the feet of Sigmund Freud and bad psychoanalysis. And it winds up being an ad hominem against Freud, who actually brought some interesting ideas to the fore, like his conception of the subconscious and all that. Mm-hmm. And like all he is used for is like really crappy, like psychoanalysis of people that you either don't like or even don't mind, but want to tear down for political reasons, which is seems to be the case half the time too. And it's like, there's actually a fair bit of ideological collateral damage, because when you use crappy ideas to poorly, I feel like another one that suffers is Dunning-Kruger effect, which, as far as I can tell, is a real phenomenon. But it is never valuable to invoke Dunning-Kruger, just as it is never valuable to invoke narcissism. If you accuse someone else of being a narcissist, that is 9 times out of 10 projection, because it's never any use to accuse someone of being a narcissist. If they are a narcissist, you leave. If it's only valuable to accuse someone of narcissism if they're not a narcissist, because if they are a narcissist and you accuse them, that doesn't hit them emotionally. They'll just try to see what they can. How can they use that to flip it on you and make you feel guilty for bringing this up? It's only useful to accuse someone of narcissism if they're not a narcissist, which makes you
do it in the third person.
Yeah.
You can say that person is a narcissist.
Oh yeah.
But because then that's you're doing a description of someone. You're not trying to influence them, but you're like, well, that is clearly narcissism.
And in that third person sense is where Dunning-Kruger is also useful. I'm thinking in terms of the second person. My least favorite book. Have I bashed on Tom Nichols today? I don't think I have. My least favorite
not today.
Yeah, speaking of gossip. No, but this isn't bashing his character. I literally know nothing about his character, just his book. The Death of Expertise basically attempts to pin all of the growing American distrust in experts on Dunning-Kruger effect. Saying, Americans think they know more than they used to because of the internet, but that's only made them more confident, but not from real knowledge. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is why Americans don't trust experts. Now, that is either speaking in a flattering way to experts who are reading the book and saying, yeah, all the people who distrust us are just morons who don't know what they don't know. Or it's literally bashing the reader and saying, you are less smart than you think you are. And psychoanalyzing not just one person that he hasn't been in session with as a non-psychologist, but an entire generation, an entire population.
Right.
Never mind the patterns of manipulation that we can all see that he just didn't mention. Anything else? But anyways, it would be an example of a second person. I think. Well, I guess you could make an argument that it's third person, but basically, it's just another example of a thing where there is a legitimate use of the idea, but when it gets employed rhetorically, like the slippery slope, like ad hominem, it's very easy to conflate legitimate character judgments with fallacies and that kind of thing.
There's so much. I think just there's so much gossip in the culture. It's like I wanted to talk a little bit about what we think good conduct is. What is good conduct rather than just in terms of argumentation, but what do you participate in?
Oh, can I bring up Plato?
Of course, it's literally your job.
So the opening of Plato's Republic is this question of justice, and basically the elevator pitch for why should we strive to be good? Why not lean into the drama, for example? Why not lean into rhetoric and become powerful? Why not start the beefs and all that stuff? And
just let go.
Yeah. What Socrates what the question he's posed with, and the problem is that he is defending justice as both a means to an end and an end in itself. And so in order to get to the question more properly, his young participants in this conversation, Glaucon and Adeimantus, create this scenario where it says, you say it's justice is in virtue, basically, is good as an end in itself. So suppose you had a man who was perfectly just, and he was believed to be unjust by other people. Everyone else thought he was actually a bad person. And there's another man, Gyges, is his name, who is perfectly unjust. He has a ring that he can turn a particular way to make himself invisible. So he can take what he wants, sleep with whomever he wants, do essentially whatever he wants in the kingdom, and then blame the just man for what he did. And everyone believes him to be a morally upright person. And so they say, Socrates, we have a perfectly just man and a perfectly unjust man. And the unjust man is thought to be just, and the just man is thought to be unjust. Now tell us, who would you rather be? Basically. And that's the question of justice that is attempted to be answered by the Republic. Is justice truly an end in and of itself? And if so, why? And that's where you get to the really interesting questions. That's the sort of question that makes your head a more interesting place, and the world a more interesting place. And it puts you in contact with higher level people. I think you're contending with Plato himself in that case.
Right.
So like I was kind of saying before, ad hominem is an easy way out. It's an easy way to dismiss arguments. The opposite of an ad hominem, which is it's not quite a straw man, but it's in the same family as a straw man, is to steel man. To say, suppose Karl Marx was a good person, and suppose Karl Marx in fact did work in the coal mines and came to these conclusions in the manner of like a 1920s industrial labor survivor, like a Jack London sort of character. Right. Suppose all of these character flaws we put on him were actually reversed, and he was actually a good person. And suppose everything that you hear about all the things we say about Karl Marx were actually true of Ludwig von Mises and of Hayek, and they were actually crappy people. Would the arguments change? Would the quality of the arguments change? Would any of that change? And how would I, taking away these shortcuts, these easy outs, how would I address the problem? How would I address the argument in that case? Mm-hmm. And that's not, you are consciously setting aside information that could be useful if you're going to talk about groups of people and say, oh, look, there is a pattern between the character of Karl Marx and a Rousseau and these types. But you become, I think, a better, more powerful person if you say, okay, I've got that, but can I like take the more serious challenge of dealing with the ideas themselves? Right. I think that's where the power is. And I think that's where the power is, because look at how much effect these sometimes crappy people were able to have on the world with just ideas. You know?
Yeah. I mean, and that's, obviously there's something there that has to be engaged, in some way. Or you just don't listen to them right away and then shut them down before they get started. Like, you're like, oh, this person who I would obviously never listen to, I'm not going to listen to you. I mean, there is something to be said for obviously judging people at the outset about like, no, I won't be interested in anything you have to say.
Yeah. And your time is valuable. You got to pick your battles. And
stereotypes in the same way that we talk about like security issues in terms of like stereotypes being a shorthand of a way to because humans don't have time to process all of that information. Right. If you see someone who looks a little sketchy on the other side of the street, you like change course, make decisions about that based on their behavior. I don't care if they're really a delicate flower inside. You're throwing me all the signals that I need to make a quick judgment about my own safety. Right. And so like that's what stereotyping is. And the same thing with this is true of intellectual arguments as well. Like, I mean, like I said, if there's a certain kind of haircut, I mean, I don't argue with women anyway, but I mean, if I were to argue with a woman, say, in some kind of crazy mixed up simulation,
Camille Paglia walks into your office.
I would not. I would not argue with that woman. I have seen her work in person, and whatever you think you're right about, she will make you wrong. That is a terrifyingly smart woman.
Fair enough.
Who talks fucking fast. Like, I would be like, and I would also be wrong and a degenerate and all kinds of things by the time she got done. I'm not ready for that smoke.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because I have like a reader. People were watching Barry. I was reading her when I was a really young kid, and I actually went to a Camille Paglia book signing when I first got to New York City. Went to art school. I actually went to a book signing and had her sign a book to whatever fake name I was using at that point. And so it was like Vamps and Tramps or something, the essay collection when it came out. And I listened to her read, and that's when she had security, and she was like the number one target of feminists and whatever. So she had these 2 security guards around her the whole time, whatever. But yeah, man, that woman could talk. I remember like being a kid, be like, holy shit. But anyway. But were I to have a discussion with a woman philosophically, I can tell you there are certain haircuts that would make them wrong to start with. Like, a woman with a certain kind of haircut, I'm like, yeah, no, I don't care what you have to say. I already, I can do the mental math of what you're throwing me some signals that let me know where your ideas come from.
Would your haircut get you confused with a woman named Karen on the internet?
Yeah. Or someone who doesn't know what their gender is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes a similar haircut, but yeah, maybe an asymmetrical bob thing, like that. You don't want to. Yeah, like you want to stay away from that.
But while we're profiling, could I throw in we're talking about ad hominems. We could talk. I think related to what I was saying before about wizards, about a pro homonym. For the person, and this is a
solar idealists tend to be extremely handsome.
Yes, that's true. This category is not necessarily super handsome, but they're people who might be worth listening to, even if you don't necessarily agree with them right away. Right. And this is the wizard physiognomy. These guys are almost universally 5'7", which is weird. Like or 5'6" or 5'8", somewhere 5'7" plus or minus an inch and a half. They tend to have male pattern baldness. They tend to be skinny. They almost always wear glasses, and they tend to talk with wizard hands. Yeah. I was talking about Maynard James Keenan, Scott Adams, and a couple other people, and a follower mentioned a Brazilian I'd never heard of named Renato Amoedo, who's apparently he's a former law enforcement agent turned like Christian and cryptocurrency advocate. And he's apparently this big underground figure. He's not very popular because Brazil has crazy censorship now. But he's this kind of interesting subversive personality that a Brazilian acquaintance of mine said, hey, this sounds like this guy. And sure enough, he is 5'7", skinny, bald, or no, he's not bald actually. He looks like he might go bald in 10 years. He's got that receding widow's peak, but it's not fully there yet. And martial arts, his nickname is like a firearm, because he talks very fast or something. But there's people like an example of someone who fits this physiognomy who I really don't like. I disagree with, but is a powerful wizard type of person, is Yuval Noah Harari, with Homo Deus and Sapiens and that stuff. So that physiognomy seems to be a tell for interesting. Keep an eye on this person.
Well, there's an autistic nerd physiognomy that goes with it as well. Like arguing with guys on the internet, there's a certain, it's like this dude is either going to be a fat neck beard, or he's going to be really skinny and intense. Yeah. And skinny intense. Like there was always like, there are like 2 kinds of pagan guys. They're like fat, like I drink mead. And then there's like, I really like to get in really deep about the ruins and then like read about them for thousands of hours. And also I know a lot about the SS. You know, like
No, okay.
yeah. Like there's that guy. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've met many of both times.
Also,
It's like, but you can
Cokes
sometimes
without
they
Coke.
make the same arguments, you know. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, and I'm not saying necessarily get into arguments with these people. There's one guy
right.
I follow who's also in this category, also 5'7", bald with glasses, more fit than he looks, and that's Vox Day. And you have to take him with a grain of salt because he's ideologically attached to a few particular sources that lead him very predictably astray on certain topics. But that doesn't mean that the other stuff he says, and almost this is breaking the physiognomy category here, but that's how I feel about Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb brings the same kind of analysis to every single question, which is why he has insightful things to say about currencies, about risk in finance, about all these other things, but could get something like COVID wrong.
Right.
And when you understand why he got the question of the shots wrong from the perspective of how he analyzes literally everything else, you're like, oh, I see why he would have missed this thing. And you just take that into account, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna not listen to him on this one issue, but that doesn't mean the things he's saying about this other thing aren't relevant. And you kind of have to do that with every cutting edge thinker, because they're operating in a weirdly precise niche that doesn't take anything into account. Like you were saying before about judgment, you are responsible at the end of the day, and it's not your job to change their mind necessarily. You don't need to be arguing with them. But as far as people to listen to, and if you were to have arguments, engaging with the idea is always going to make everyone better off. Even if you don't necessarily persuade anyone, you'll at least have a clear idea in your own head.
Yeah. I mean, you can, like, there's certain things like that, you know, you should not take my opinion seriously on. I mean, there are very few. No, but you should, there are certain things like, I'm like, I don't really have a good opinion about that. It's not like, it's not a hill I'm going to die on. It's not like something, you know, but there's some things I'm like, well, I'm right, you know, about that. But there's a lot of stuff that like, I don't have any expertise in that area. I don't care about it. And I try to stay somewhat in my lane on most. I mean, because you know, people don't. You know, I don't need to talk about like international like fucking relations. Like, I mean, I can talk about in the broad sense of, you know, vague things, but like the details of that's not my specialty. Who cares what I have to say? You know, and the same thing is like we were talking about someone in the group, and it's like, well, this person did X, Y, and Z really bad, but they're like really good at this athletic thing. Like they're good at like telling people how to do this one like athletic movement or whatever. They know how to do that really well. They've maybe screwed up everything else in their lives and are just terrible people, but they know how to do that thing. So like, let them teach that thing. Like that thing that one thing that they're good at, let them do that one thing that they're good at.
And if you want to learn that one thing, but you take them, the best people at that one thing, out of your equation because you don't like them for moral or ideological reasons, who are you really crippling there? You know? For sure.
And I will do that sometimes knowingly. I'm like, well, that person might have the best information, but I'm not going to promote their work. Because I look at a lot of things that like, well, can I then go refer people to that? And if the answer is no, then I'm not going to look into it myself probably, because I'm like, well, that's something I'm never going to cite. I'm never going to like say, hey, go use this, because that's kind of my job, is like to point people to other things. So if I don't want to promote this person, I'm not going to like look deep into their work. But yeah, I mean, it brings up this. It's another thing I had on the tip of my head for a second there, right before we got into that last little bit. But damn it, I lost it. But I mean, there's so many little things of like what you can ignore about people.
Yeah,
and just evaluate.
It's choosing your battle, because again, it's like so much of the gossip culture, especially the people who lean into it and create beefs, they're uh, hedging. They're betting on people disagreeing with them. So if you can identify people who are saying outrageous things in order to get attention, then gossiping about them kind of feeds the worst of the internet, you know?
Right.
And if you're gossiping about someone in a way that they don't want to be gossiped about, like a Huberman, for example, like, why are you doing that? You know, now there are examples of scientists that might be worth gossiping about. The who is the guy who did the Stanford prison experiment? Zimbardo, correct? Phil Zimbardo. There are allegations, and I think these are fairly well confirmed at this point, that a lot of the Stanford prison experiment was not an experiment at all. It was more like it was something closer to a scripted drama than it was an experiment. There's very little scientific about it. And so does that have a bearing on the science of the psychology of evil? Absolutely it does. That is not an ad hominem attack.
No, not at all. No.
That is an academic critique of
Right.
Yeah. And then a very unfortunate one, and this one was accidental, but still has academic implications, is the Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, who I think is a very upstanding and serious scholar, who wrote On Combat and On Killing. But On Combat, I believe, some of the historical data that he used was fraudulent. Now that doesn't it was another researcher, not him. He trusted the data, and it turned out to be basically completely made up. I don't remember which part, but that's not even ad hominem. You know, that's not even criticizing him. But sometimes the character of the person is relevant to the question in hand, the subject in question. So with Phil Zimbardo's work, that kind of gossip might be, if you can even call it gossip at that point, might be good to know.
I wouldn't call that gossip. I would think that's like, okay, well, what's actually going on here, and like let's see what was actually done, and did this taint the evidence, and is this something that are we now drawing false conclusions about things that we've gotten in our OODA loop of information, that we have like this thing that's not real. So we have to go back and recalibrate a whole bunch of stuff. I think that's a totally valid thing. I think the stuff that bothers me the most about modern society and what I see so much is just the concept. Like, I think the reason why this is important to me, because we're trying to like live well, right? And we're trying to like live in the way that what is the best way to live. Right. Like constantly talking about people's personal lives, like because the thing is, we acknowledge that we're all human, and we're all fallible. You know, everybody has like some weird shit in their closet. Like they've done something that they wouldn't want someone else to know about. Like they're not, like super proud of, because we've all done things that we regret. You know, like that we like, well, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Or like, I wouldn't do that now that I'm older, that I did then. But it's still embarrassing. Like there's still stuff, everybody can be embarrassed, I think. And so a society that focuses on finding those things and then talking about them endlessly is a trashy society. I mean, it's like we can acknowledge that gossiping is human, but also then say, well, what can we do to stigmatize it enough that it's minimized? Because you can't make it go away. You can't have a war on gossip, and gossip is going to go away forever. That's not real. But what can you do to say this is not what we'd like to see? This is not virtuous. Is it like, if you're talking about virtuous conduct, is gossip virtuous conduct? I mean, whereas we're already making exceptions for like where it's not really gossip. It's like, well, do we need to see if there's an extra motivation there? Do we need to see if there's like some kind of influence? Is there things where there's shenanigans that we don't need to know that in fact affected things that could are information? But like in the focusing on like just dirty details of people's lives, I think it just lowers society and discourse so much.
Well, and it feels like a symptom of something. There's this old saying that I think is a little bit misleading. I don't remember who came up with it, but it's the idea that great minds think about ideas, middle tier mind thinks about events, and petty small minds think about people. But I'm not sure that's true. I think there are great minds who think about people, but they're looking up to people. Like when Elon Musk named his company Tesla, and no doubt looked up to Nikolai Tesla, he wasn't thinking about the bad things, you know?
Someone had brought that up in the group that in the discussion that I was referring to originally that got us started on this. Someone was like, "I'm pretty sure Nikolai Tesla died a virgin," was basically like
I brought
whatever.
That up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and who cares? Yeah. Like who cares? How does it have any like who cares? He accomplished X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and Alexander the Great carried around a copy of the Iliad and was obsessed with the ideal of Achilles. He wasn't thinking about the worst parts of Achilles.
Right.
He was inspired by the best of Achilles. And so when we're talking about society and the tendency to gossip, and as you, I think, perfectly, diagnosed, the obsession with tearing down bigger people than ourselves is like the nature of gossip. And so like the antithesis isn't to stop talking about people and to focus on ideas, but to be, instead of focusing on and finding ourselves drawn to the negatives, like also like what is inspiring about these given individuals who are sometimes imperfect. Show me the perfect person. Not to sound like it's such a Christian thing to say.
I know. You just want to be like, if you were without sin, cast the first stone.
Perfection is like, in a transcendent sense, is actually conceptually impossible, because perfection implies some kind of alignment with your context, and context is changing. So yeah, like perfection in that sense is not even the right measure. It's like, what good were they able to do with what they had? And sometimes what they had are baggage and misaligned instincts and whatever. But it takes it feels like a bad sign of character in and of itself to see the story of someone like Napoleon or Alexander the Great, and the first question, the most interesting thing you're drawn to, is what's their sexual history?
Yeah, and it's to add hominem that the kind of person who does that, that's a tell. Like, why are you what? Because that's what you're interested in. Yeah, like that. That's the kind of stuff that you're interested in. You want history to be a fucking Bodice Ripper. And you want to hear about everybody's intrigues and like fucking like dirty laundry and whatever, because that's what you like. That's what interests you. And you see that a lot of people with. I encountered a bunch with the bitches from New York who write about me. Used to write about me, and don't write about me now. But. The thing is that they focus on like me, like sexually or whatever, because that's what they care about is sex. Like they're focused on sexuality as identity, and that's what they care about, and that's like everything to them. So it's the most interesting thing in the world. And you see that them do that with all kinds of people. The same thing, like really with the Huberman thing. It's like, well, like we're women and we're interested in sex and gossip, so therefore that is the most interesting thing to talk about this guy. And so it really it says more about them than it says about him.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And again, this is a like you don't need to apply this in the second person in any given context and say, like, you're talking to someone and they say, well, didn't Huberman do? And you're like, oh, you just think that because you're obsessed with sex. But as a broad third person typing thing, it is a very, very useful heuristic for knowing what kinds of sources to take interest in. Because I think if you wanted to take a kind of political, cultural argument for abstaining gossip, gossip just seems to give more power to the gossip mongers. And whether that's the people like the Kardashians who manufacture it for their own benefit, or the sellers of it who write the tabloids that,
like your TMZ kind of guys and like whatever, who this is all they care about is finding gossip. And so, yeah, it gives them more power. You're putting money in their hands by giving them attention, because they're looking for attention by saying gossip or internet beefs or whatever. It's like you're feeding that and making it more making them, you're rewarding that behavior. Yeah. And it's like you can't change the world by just not rewarding behavior you don't like, because that is what it is. I mean, it's a mass game, and the mass of people are always going to do the lowest shit. That's right. That's going to happen.
But in an attention economy, not only are we necessarily that's zero sum. We all have a zero sum finite amount of attention. Denying attention to one thing also gives us attention to direct at something else, be it a really, really cool UFC accomplishment, which I think happened recently. I wasn't following it super closely, but apparently there was a fantastic fight, or some people did.
Ryan was telling me about it on our hike today.
Or more serious threats like dragons, or productive tasks that you can, participate in or support. Like James O'Keefe is doing some cool stuff. Let's throw money at that. Oh, someone's building a frickin' rocket that is going to try to put a vegetable garden on Venus. We can throw money at that. Maybe not that, but there are other things that we can give our attention to, which for me is a lot of ideas. I'm trying to. I'm no friend of Christianity, but some of the Christian arguments are fun. And instead of the meme lords, there's an interesting argument that has been a new version of an old theological argument that I'm going to try to bring on and discuss on a separate podcast at some point. It's like, instead of talking about Chad, Crusader, virgin, atheist, is like, or we can talk about psychophysical agreement, which I think is way cooler than Chad Virgin memes.
Yeah. Another cultural thing that you can do, which I mean, when we talk about creating a new culture, right, is people will just do what people around them are doing and accept what a norm is. And I would like solar idealists and people who are in this space or whatever, I'm like, yeah, we don't engage in that. And that people are like, oh, it's possible to not engage in that? Like, really? By making an example and being just kind of openly like, that's gross. You can shame people just by being like, that's gross. It's really, you're going to do that? All right. Just kind of like, make it a shameful thing to do. Yeah. That you're establishing what your norm is. Yeah, it is. And it's like, oh, you're going to spend all day talking about Jake Paul or whatever, you're going to spend all day talking about, that's what you're about. We're going to talk about Jake Paul all day. Oh, or whatever, you're going to talk about, whatever, celebrity, did, had sex with whoever or whatever is going on. They talk about how fucking Taylor Swift can't get married. We're going to talk about this kind of shit. That's your life. That's what you're about. And just, I think by insisting on that, you can kind of influence men around you to like, okay, well, that's gross. What else you got? Yeah, like let's not talk about that. That's you just gotta like nah. Like yeah, like it doesn't even have to be like that pointed. Just like yeah,
You
I'm
just
not
ignore
interested in
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we're
The-
moving on from that.
you
Yeah,
could
like
probably measure the lost cortisol in an average individual who makes a post and gets no engagement. Like
oh for sure.
that's a serious hit. Especially if posting becomes like a habit.
Yeah.
So
Oh
yeah,
for sure, for sure.
just not engaging. I mean that sort of blurs the line in the case of between redirection and shaming. It's not engaging with a post that you see, especially in any context where it is visible that you've seen it and didn't hit that like button.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Or in real life too. I mean, it's just like this
or in
is
real life.
not something that
That sounds better.
we're feeding into. You know, what I mean, and that's I think this show probably is boring for a lot of people because we actually don't do a lot of that. Because that's what a lot of internet, especially YouTube, is like internet beefs and like, can you believe? Oh my God, what this person said, which is all of ESPN. Also, by the way, can you believe can you believe what so and so said? And like half of reality television, all of reality television, all the stuff that people were engaged with, and we don't do that. Like I don't talk about like people very often unless we're talking about politicians we don't like or
we're talking about
writers who have bad ideas. Writers who have most of the people we talk shit about are dead. Like or very nearly dead.
That's like the right time to talk about. And it's like I feel like that's the right time to talk about politics too. If you actually want to learn about politics, talk about politics from 100 years ago and back.
Yeah.
Start with Herodotus and work forward. Work through the war between the Italian city states in like the 1400s, and like you will probably learn a lot more. Not no BS, but both sides of the BS of history. Because there's no vested interest in the past anymore. So you can actually learn a lot better in many ways.
What would be?
Maybe the same way, I guess.
This would take a lot of research and be a side project of some kind. But whenever the shenanigans that may or may not involve dragons begin, it would be really interesting to find the 1893 example of the exact same thing and just talk about that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That would be really productive. And it would be like, what do you talk about? And then just literally only talk about that. Don't compare it to the thing that's happened right now. Just literally did you know that in 1873, so-and-so got switched out in the election on the last day, or whatever, or whatever just happened. It's already happened once, somewhere in history. Find that example and just talk about that. It's kind of an elegant troll away from that, create perspective.
There's an Instagram channel my wife follows called Spooky Lake Month, and it only puts out content in October, and it's just about spooky lakes around the world and why they're spooky and the history behind them and stuff. I feel like we need an election year history account that only puts out content every fourth year and is just little micro history lessons with not even trying to draw parallels. Just like in 1789, we had this thing which led to a duel between Hamilton and Burr, and then this other thing happened with the Treasury and blah blah blah. And it's just bringing the attention back to those historical contexts, because not only does it offset the attention, but it also, there's a tendency, and I feel like this is true with gossip as well as politics, there's a tendency for people to get really black-pilled by current events. Yeah. And I remember having a debate with an old foreman who was convinced that everything was going to crap and that the current generation, millennials and Gen Z, were far inferior to Gen X and the baby boomers. And all I said to him was, well, it's interesting you say that, because there's a book from 2,800 years ago where the old men said the exact same thing about how, you soldiers, Achilles and Agamemnon are nothing like as good as the soldiers that I fought alongside in Caledonia. There was this guy and that guy and so forth. And I said, isn't it funny how consistently across all of history, the older generation thought the younger generation was degenerating. And
it is. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just a nonstop line of decrease from the Bronze Age to the present. Is that and when I put it to him that way, and I said, do you think we've all just been getting consistently worse across time? He just sort of laughed and said, that's an interesting thought. And we went back to work and nothing else was said. But nothing is ever exactly like the past.
Right.
It doesn't even rhyme exactly, because the context is never even. It's more like Heraclitus's river than it is like some kind of clock that goes through a cycle. But there are patterns, and there are certain kinds of like types of problems. There are social dynamics, because while the technology has changed and the state has changed and the context and even the geography in some cases has changed, we haven't changed that much, in 3,000 years. And so it's the same kinds of complaints, same kinds of relationships, the same kinds of problems, and even the same kinds of trade-offs that we have to choose between. And the problem of corruption and power and people talking about each other behind each other's backs is, as I'm sure it was exactly as prevalent in Rome as it is now. Technology notwithstanding.
Yeah, I mean, technology is a little bit of a driver of what's going on now. But obviously, I think we were talking about Dustin. Dustin was like talking about, because that's his specialty is ancient Rome, and so he was talking about all kinds of political disputes that were happening in at that time. And of course, yeah, that's always happened. It's always been part of human nature. It's just a matter of like the best men that we admire, are they the ones who are doing that?
No.
Exactly. And so like that's it. Well, if you want to be like the best man that your best version of yourself that you could possibly be, you probably are not being like constantly talking about fucking petty drama and petty fucking gossip about people's personal lives and all kinds of shit like that.
Well, you mentioned
low behavior.
You mentioned the OODA loop before. Maybe that's the best frame for understanding this, because the best men, who everyone else are talking about, are orienting themselves. Right. Gossip sort of orients you, is someone else orienting your attention. So you're behind. You might be useful to the people that you're gossiping about, but it's less the other way around.
It's externally focused.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're focusing on somebody outside yourself rather than like what you're doing. So you're looking at you're worrying about other people instead of your own goals.
Right.
So no, that's absolutely true. I was gonna the point about old men always complaining about young men. It was funny actually when I had him review The Way of Men really quick, and he gave me a quote for it, and then he I guess figured out that I was a bad person and blocked me immediately on Facebook back in the day. But I always get his name wrong. I think it's Sam Sheridan. But he wrote the book called The Fighter's Heart, and I got him to look at The Way of Men when it first came out, and he gave me a quote for it. And his one response was haven't men always been saying that men are getting worse throughout history? Because he went to Harvard or something. He's obviously read a good bit of history as well. Or I guess he just plagiarized it all. Because that's what they do there. But it is true. And my argument for that has always been yes, that has always been the case historically. But that doesn't make that it's never more or less true. It never... the fact that old men have always said that the younger generation is weak and soft and lame doesn't mean that the younger generation is never actually weak and soft and lame.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like it's like, because people make it like, well, it's always been the same, so nothing has changed. And I was like,
it
no.
It might be true incidentally. You can't take their word for it, but just because they have no historical basis for saying this, no good frame of reference, doesn't mean they might not be right. Especially if testosterone levels are declining as they tell us they are, and things like that. It's a very good chance it's correct. Or maybe we just stopped smoking cigarettes and that had an effect. Who knows? So my source for that was, of course, I've probably talked about this before, but Greg Naj and his analysis of the Hesiod's works and days, and his description of the generations of men, the gold generation, the silver generation, the bronze generation, then a nameless generation, and an iron generation. And in these 5 generations, what Naj puts together is that what he's describing are the positive and the negative attributes of heroes and hero cult religious participants. So the heroes are golden and wondrous and loved by the gods in the golden age, but also brutal and impious and horrible in the bronze age. And then the hero cult religious followers are pious and respectful and hold society together in the silver age, and are forgetful and lazy and disrespectful in the iron age, and or in the nameless age. I might have those two mixed up. And so he's actually describing it within the Iliad itself, within any given generation you choose, you can find characters of all of these descriptions, and even sometimes multiple of these within a single character over the course of the story. So the universality of all of the traits and the characterization seems to precede any given generation, going back as it does to 8th or 9th century at least. When we first started having things written down, it's probably true in classical Greece. I have no doubt we could find Romans complaining of similar things. The
Hagakure is just an old samurai complaining that young samurais are pussies. That's basically the whole thing. So like they never even kill themselves anymore. What the hell? Like it's basically the whole Hagakure. It's summed up in bro. It's like these pussies never even fucking kill themselves anymore. It's. Yeah, I mean, like I said, so men have always been saying that, but there are worse and better times. There are times where men were certainly harder 200 years ago. I think that's fair, but maybe not in like metropolitan Europe. Maybe not as much in metropolitan Europe, but dudes working on the frontier in America 200 years ago were hard as nails. Comparatively, to what you have now. Not to say that there are no young men today who aren't like that. I'm sure there are, but there are probably more of them. It's a big, when you talk about trends, you're
numbers
talking about,
game,
it's number games. So it's not like you can't find anybody like that, but there's trends and generations for sure. But,
sure, yeah, oh, absolutely. But cool. I mean, as the I know I was denigrating memes before, but the good times create weak men, create bad times, create strong men thing. There's probably a degree of truth to that, and if we
I think that was a quote before as a meme, so I think you're safe on that.
Okay,
but it's not a no. I mean, there's that one guy who wrote a book about it, but he pulled the quote from somewhere else, and it's like it's been a thing for a long time.
Attaching an image to words doesn't automatically make it untrue.
No,
we're talking specifically about the shitty fluted hand drawn MS Paint kinds of images, but we can call it.
the thing that about memes, and I think I actually did. I think I did pull that video of me saying that memes are stupid off of YouTube the other day because I was just in the back end and I was like, yeah, we can just make that go away. That's fine. Because it was like my thing with memes is always the Wojak memes, but I did not explain that properly in the video. So it's like seems like now it's like I can't use a picture with words. God damn it! Like I'm a hypocrite. But no, I was just but the Wojak memes specifically were because they were such obviously degenerate drawings and used to criticize degenerate culture. There was like a self-own implied in them, in like they know this is degenerate culture, and also there was that reeking air of the straw manning and just I am. Whatever I like is what the Chad does, and whatever I don't like is what the Virgin does. Yeah, it just becomes like, okay, I just made, it's not much different than everyone who I don't like is Hitler. It comes to the same kind of conclusion. But anyway, so I don't think we have any more questions in the thing, do we?
No.
Okay, cool. All right, well, I think we should probably wrap it up right about here.
Yeah.
But that sounds like a good place. But anyway, you guys who are following along, thank you for joining us and listening to and hopefully you'll be dissuaded from base gossip and trashy ad hominems now. But use them when they're necessary with good judgment.
And if you would like to direct your attention to something better than gossip or what Jake Paul or what some famous scientist has been up to in his personal time, you can...
Right.
Like check out a good book that is edifying, or if you have already purchased it, leave a review. It's hopefully some better quality things to pay attention to, some better quality thoughts. I remember hearing Curtis Yarvin complaining about the way the red pill meme was stolen by Nazis and pickup artists at the same time, and he's like, I was selling a high quality intellectual product. And they immediately started like using the brand to cash in some shitty, crappy, low quality intellectual content. He said it was very frustrating. But you can go the other way too. You can reject the low quality intellectual stuff, and in the same way that you want to replace McBurgers with like good steak and vegetables and things, you can do that with ideas too. Replace the memes with like thoughtful essays, primary sources, like classical books and stuff like that. Absolutely.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us. And obviously like and subscribe, but you're already here, so you've already done that. And share stuff with your friends. Get some other people turned on to it. And again, I always want to encourage people. We have that Discord group. We had... I'm going to mess up his name again. But because it's like such a normal name, like James Powell. It sounds like it's like a historical figure. But James Powell, I think he has been doing. I think he dropped another essay about dragons, another video essay about dragons in our speech, and he came in and asked some questions in our Discord.
Nice.
And so that's available, and we would love to have more conversations there. And get more ideas for the show and talk about things that you want us to talk about. So please join us in our Discord. Just talk about whatever and get some stuff started. We can grow as a culture. So cool, guys. All right. See you next time.